I'll do that. Did I check that?
Folks, we're going to get underway. Thanks so much for being here tonight. My name's Graham Stanton. I'm on the faculty here at Ridley, and I am the director of the Ridley Centre for Children's and Youth Ministry, which sounds a whole lot more elaborate than it actually is. It's sort of this sign and my office. But you know, with a sign, you can do all sorts of things like things like this. So we're really glad that you're with us tonight, and we're really glad that there are people with us remotely in various places. So welcome to you as well. And I'm really glad to welcome Chris. Chris has been, we've been friends for a long time. We were saying to a couple of students this evening that we met in 1992.
The year they were born, yeah.
Yeah, and they were both born in 1992, and it made us feel very young and relevant.
Yep.
So Chris has come down from Sydney, and really great to have him with us. As is our custom here at Ridley, I just want to begin by giving an acknowledgement of country. We recognise the sovereignty of our one Creator, the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who made all people in His image, and therefore we acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. We give thanks for the elders of this nation, and we pray for gospel blessings on their descendants. It's a great privilege that we get this site, this property, and the newly renovated Ridley with a proper front door. So hopefully it was easier to find your way here tonight. As I say, Chris Hudson with us. Tell us very briefly, mate, where do you live and who do you live with?
I live in a place called Shell Harbour, which is just south of Wollongong, which is just south of Sydney. Married to Belinda. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 6 and 4-year-old boys. So good for babysitting, bad for movie nights.
So you have some experience with your own teenagers, but where did Understanding Teenagers, the ministry that you're on, maybe tell us a bit about what is UT?
Yep, so Understanding Teenagers, basically it's a service that helps adults who live and work with teenagers build better relationships with those teenagers. That's the theory, that's what I try to do. So I met you when we were at college together. After I did that, about 10 years in doing youth work, and I learned a lot of things there, and I guess it crystallised for me after that. I actually went back to uni, did a master's in education looking at adult learning, but also adolescent psychology, and I think that's where it really crystallised for me that as a youth worker it was great to make an impact with young people, but one of the things that really stood out for me from that experience was how big an impact the adults who teenagers live with actually has on their well-being. And sort of in my studies, that all crystallised an idea of, maybe I could actually help young people by actually helping the adults. So I was transforming teenagers one adult at a time. That's sort of what Understanding Teenagers did. That's where it formed, I guess, and it's been mumbling along since then.
Yeah. Chris is quite self-effacing. He won't tell you about the interactions that he has with parents and people interested in this ministry from around the world. Ministry here based in Sydney, but in other parts of Australia and other parts of the world. I have so much valued our interactions, but you know, this won't just be a friends catch up. That's tomorrow. Tonight we are in your hands, and thanks so much for this topic, surviving the emotional rollercoaster of adolescence. I'm going to pray for us and for Chris as we begin. God our Father, we thank you for the great privilege it is that we might be here tonight. We thank you for each teenager who is in our lives. And just as we call them to mind right now, we hold them before you and ask for your blessing on them. And we pray that we would be able to help them by being helped ourselves. And we thank you for our brother for bringing Chris to us tonight. And we pray for him as he leads us and for our conversation together. Lord, may this be a time where we really know your blessing and presence. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Friends, I know that parents live on fairly tight schedules. We said we're going to finish at 9, and so we will. Okay, So there'll be time for questions as we go through. I've told Chris that I'm going to come up the front at 5 to 9 to do the wrap-up things. So if it comes to that sort of question time, and you think it's 8:45, or if I ask a question, it might go on for a bit long, so maybe I won't, because I don't want to be here past 9 o'clock. Don't worry, ask the question, and then at 5 to 9, I'll shut things down, and we'll all be able to go home. So that's the plan.
Yeah.
Off we go.
Or if you want to stay behind and got 10 minutes, apparently I'm staying here tonight, so I probably have 10 minutes to answer your question after Graham is rudely interrupted. So please feel free to do that. So thank you for coming out. It's great to be with you. I love doing this. Thank you particularly for coming out on such a balmy Melbourne evening. And it's even more humbling that you come out because you live with someone who knows it all, if you've got a teenager. So that you'd come out to learn something from someone else is even more humbling. But no, thank you. And thanks for taking the time to invest in yourself and ultimately to invest in your young person. Now, I just want to get a sense of who I'm talking to. And I can see you're all fine people, so I'm feeling pretty good. Hands up if your eldest is 12 years or younger. Okay, so you're just about to embark on the journey. Yep, okay, cool. So 14 or younger, your eldest is 14 or younger. Yep, 16 or younger. Okay, so we're gonna, when I can't answer, we'll start looking down the front row. 18 and younger? Oh, look, there we go. Usually I'm always saved. There's always enough. 20 or older. Yeah. Well, yeah, you got a 20-year-old. Anyone with 20-year-olds? Kids have left home? No? Okay. Yeah. Oh, over there. Oh.
I've got the grandchildren.
Grandchildren. Are they teenagers? No, they couldn't be. They couldn't be. No. That's great. All right, so one of the good things is, and what I like to do in these things, it's not a set stump speech. So this is me trying to give you some helpful thoughts, but you know, if we can make it a conversation, that's all the better. So interrupt me. Sometimes you might have to put up your hand. That is fine. A lot of the stuff I talk about, you'll actually realise is quite common sense, right? But when you're in the middle of it, sometimes you just need to be reminded. But I also do labour some points, and it's not for your benefit I do it, it's because of the person next to you. See, I know you've got your thing mostly under control, but the person next to you, their kids are a bit, and their parenting's a bit. So just be patient and gracious, and just sit there and say, yeah, I know this, but just be nice to the person next to you. But seriously, chuck in ideas, and if I've answered a question, you've got something a little bit even more helpful to throw in, please feel free to do that. The only thing is, we don't want to be making people feel guilty, and we're not shaming people, and we're not trying to show off how good we are. And I say all the time, you're welcome to come and watch videos of me and my 6-year-old, and you realise that I'm far from the world's most perfect parent. We'll talk a bit about pushing buttons later. He's a 6 and he has got all my buttons worked out already. So we come to this as equals, all on the journey together, okay? So I'd hate for you to come away from a parenting talk feeling worse as a parent. You're looking for the 1 or 2 things tonight that apply to you that can make 2 degrees of difference for you. If you can get that out of tonight, it's probably an hour's well spent of your time.
Is it possible to get 20%?
I really hope to overachieve in that department just for you. All right. So tonight, what we're going to do, we're going to talk about, it's not just the hormones. We're going to talk about emotional equality in our homes. I don't know why I do this because titles probably don't mean anything to you, except create interest. Creating healthy homes, some common traps to avoid, and depending how we're going for time, I have a few common problems, but other people may have some issues they would like to raise. And I'm happy we can just wing that bit, right? We'll just sort of see what people are thinking and feeling and want to talk about. So that's what we're going to get into. So, not just hormones. So really quick at the start, let's just get our minds in the space of what is happening for an adolescent. And it is more than just hormones. Although hormones are a big part of it, and the cliche of it just being hormones is disappearing a bit today, but it's still there. A kid gets moody, a teenager gets a bit stroppy, and we go, oh, it's just the hormones. But when we do that, what we do is we actually miss that most of the time the hormones might be the root cause, but the presenting issue has very little to do with hormones. We've got to remember that hormones are a thing. They kick it all off, right? They're the chemicals that start the change. And we know that for a young person, a prepubescent to a pubescent, that's an 800 times increase in those chemicals that cause all the damage. So it's real, and for the brain to cop that influx of chemicals sort of for the first time since, you know, they were being formed themselves, it is a lot to deal with. So I don't want to downplay it, but at one level there's not much you can do about that, and it's usually not the real thing that's going on that you actually can do something about. Hormones are real, but it's so much more than just hormones. So what are the key things that are happening for teenagers in terms of, you know, making life a bit of an emotional roller coaster in the house? First thing, think about it's social. It is 4 times more likely that your teenager's moodiness is created by some type of relational issue than it is purely by hormones. 4 times more likely. So when they fly off in a rage or go into a 6-month sulk, it is far more likely that that has been created by the girls at school being frenemies and isolating someone, or a boy being bullied, or a teacher picking on them, or, heaven forbid, not in this room, but in some houses, it could actually be the parents that are causing the problem. There's a relational thing going on, and the teenager's mood is a reaction to the relationship stuff. Sounds really obvious, doesn't it? Until it's your kid, and they're in the mood, and you're in a mood, and it's just easy to say, oh, they're just going through that phase. Yep, they probably are, but part of that phase is they've got friends and they've got parents who don't get it, and they've got all this other stuff going on in their social life. So we want to just keep that in mind. And the great thing about a talk like this is I've got 100% of the people have been there and done that. You're all experts. You've all survived your own adolescence. Fantastic. So just remember what it was like. It's not the same for your teenager, but you remember what it was like to try and manage relationships when you were 14 years old. If you don't, if you've got nothing to do and you want to feel miserable, take a night to think about it. What was it like to have relationships when you were 14? There's social stuff going on. And this one is the really unsexy one, but it is so important. And you can just go home and Google it. Graham wanted me to sound intelligent, so I could quote research to you, but you can go home and Google the research on how much sleep does a teenager need. And you'll come up with numbers. The lowest will be 9, the highest will be over 10. That the august research institutes tell us that the average adolescent, probably it averages out, I reckon, about 9.5 hours sleep a night. If they are getting less than that, then there is a fair chance that, like I do, and possibly like you, and definitely like the person next to you, if they function for multiple days without enough sleep, they become more emotionally irritable. So you think about it. If it's 9.5 hours sleep, even if your child is asleep at 10 a.m, yes, they're definitely asleep at 10 a.m. Even if your child is in bed and asleep at 10 p.m, and you wake them up at 7 a.m, the experts would say that's half to an hour less sleep than what they need. If they're going to sleep at 11 and being woken up at 6, by the end of the school week, they're a whole night sleep deprived of sleep. And if they have to get up and do their part-time job or go to sport or go to whatever on Saturday morning, then they're even more sleep deprived, particularly if they've been at youth group or something the night before, so they don't get to sleep by 11 because they're all wound up. They're really tired. And we do know that what the hormones do to the brain is, and you probably know this, you know, when you're an adolescent, the melatonin, the chemical that secretes in the brain that triggers the sleep cycle, it actually moves back. Your kids literally aren't getting tired. Teenagers aren't getting tired till around about 10:30, even 11 p.m. at night in extreme cases. But the cycle, the length of the melatonin cycle stays the same. So they're not really waking up until 8 a.m. Now for you and me, that's actually much earlier. And all us cool 40-somethings or 50-somethings, we all think, oh, it's 9 o'clock, I've had a late night, I'm ready to go to bed. Yep, because our melatonin stuff has started to secrete earlier. It returns back like it did when we were kids, but during adolescence, it moves back. It goes later. Literally, your kids aren't, their brain isn't telling them to go to sleep till late at night, and it's not telling them to wake up till later in the morning. Now, there's lots of studies you can look up. One of the most fascinating ones was in Wyoming in 2013. They did a study on starting school times later, and you may have been involved, and maybe your school does that, which is a great idea. There's lots of research about the academic and social outcomes for kids when schools start later, high schools start later. But in some funny place called in Wyoming in the States, they did a study. They started school half an hour later. Adolescent-related road incidents reduced by 70%. There was no other intervention. There was nothing else about driver ed or changing it. All they did was change school starting times by half an hour later in the morning. Now, there's lots of that type of research. Sleep is not sexy. It's not one of those real things of, oh yeah, I'm all geared up as a parent now. And it's not a great conversation, and it's not a battle any parent wants to have with their teenager. But emotional upheaval in the household with adolescents is so often caused purely by sleep deprivation for the teenager. And also parents trying to keep them either on a childlike or an adult-like sleep pattern, when actually it's quite unique. The brain is sort of wiring them to a particular type of sleep pattern. Yes?
Sorry.
Don't be sorry.
So at what age roughly does that kind of melatonin?
It kicks in with puberty, so it's one of the effects of puberty, like full onset puberty, not early puberty, but late puberty. So, 13, 14, it kicks in, and it will start to come down when they're about 20 something. Girls a bit earlier for everything, because girls are just better. But so it's sort of that, most of those mid to late teenage years, that's the pattern. Yeah. So that's sleep. All right. The brain. Now this is really common these days. Everyone sort of understands that change in the teenage brain. It's quite unique. It reprunes. The brain basically rebuilds itself during adolescence. So people just nod so I get a sense of, don't have to labour this point. Yep. And it does it asymmetrically. So the amygdala, the middle bit of the brain that processes sort of that fight and flight stuff, the real emotional centre of the brain, that prunes and develops real quick. The front bit of the brain, that is the executive functioning, the sensible bit, the grown-up bit, it develops real late. So teenagers are wired to be emotional quite literally. Their brains are set up to respond to emotional stimulus and to respond emotionally. The bit at the front of the brain, which we use, most of us, to actually sort of edit, control, manage the emotions and how we express the emotions, that doesn't actually form properly. And for boys, again, it's not until some people are now saying it's like 25. By that time, that pruning process has really finished. So their brains are just wiring them to be emotional, if that makes sense. Individuation. The other reason your teenager is likely a bit moody and stroppy with you, because that's what adolescence is about. Just getting getting me to be different to mum and dad. And yes, there's some polite ways I can do that, but sometimes it just doesn't come across as polite, and it's not polite. That whole process of wanting autonomy, and particularly wanting emotional autonomy, so if you've done your dev psych, emotional autonomy, it's a whole thing, right? There's this whole process of adolescence about emotionally separating myself from my primary caregiver. And how do I do that? Well, it's not really like, let's have a cup of tea and talk about how I need to be emotionally my own person and somehow separate myself from you. It doesn't really work like that, does it? That's just what they did. That's what you had to do in your own way with your parents. Teenagers are wired to be emotionally reactive and emotionally provocative with their parents. That's what they need to do. Now, I don't say this to say that it always condones the behaviour or the way they go about it, but it's just a fact, right? It's not hormonal, they're actually doing it. There's something about who they are becoming that needs them to say, I need to push you emotionally. I need to work out where you start and where I begin, type of thing, and find that line. I need to do it emotionally. Emotional autonomy is that process where they go from being the kid where mum and dad know everything and can do no wrong to the process of getting to just seeing them as a normal, another adult. In the middle of that, it is, how do I get from mum being right and knowing everything? Mum knows nothing and is evil and doesn't get anything at all. That's how I get out to the balance view. I've got to go from one extreme to the other. That's what's happening during adolescence. It's normal. Different kids do it different ways, but every kid's going to do it. And finally, just remember how insecure you were as a 14-year-old. Sorry for those who had it all together. Again, for the person next to you, they were probably real, look at them, they had to be insecure, right? They should still be, that's what you're thinking. So, remember what it was like? How much energy did you use trying to pretend that you had it all under control? Teenagers, they're all like ducks. They're trying to pretend that they're just cruising along the water while underneath they are going 100 miles an hour, processing every interaction, preparing for the next interaction, trying to put on the right image, the right words, the right face, the right level of coolness, the right level of whatever in every situation, all the time trying to pretend that it comes perfectly naturally. They are working overtime, gauging every response, every nuance, every word, all this type of stuff. But here's the funny thing. Teenagers, their brains aren't wired for nuance. It's exhausting. So that's the other thing about the brain, right? The teenage brain, one of the things it does is teenagers are terrible at discerning the moods of other people because it's actually something that happens more up here. So because Graham wants me to quote research. So I did this study, right, where they got adolescents and adults to look at two sets of faces, or a mixture of faces. One was an aggressive face, a series of aggressive looking faces, threatening faces, sort of like Graham's looking at me now, and others were quite placid and calm looking faces. They did this in I don't know if it was an MRI or how they did it, but they wired the kids up and they wired the adults up. They took the adults through it. Of course, the adults, when they saw the aggressive face, that amygdala part of the brain, that actually lit up as part of the response to that. When they saw the calm face, nothing really happened to the amygdala, it stayed quite passive. When they showed the same facial sets to teenagers, around between the ages of 14 and 15, it was quite inconsistent. A calm face, half the teenagers' amygdalas lit up. An aggressive face, half the amygdalas didn't light up. They actually don't have the capacity to discern facial moods, let alone the empathy to appreciate that. So when you wonder why your teenager isn't actually responding to your stern look, they just might not think it's stern. Or when you calmly and happily welcome them home and they say, "Why are you ruining my life, you crazy woman?" That's because they're just not real good at picking your tone, right? So imagine that. You're actually not good at it and you're spending your whole time trying to do it. Talk about a futile use of a massive amount of energy. Are we getting back in the space of what it's like to be a teenager? It's way more than just hormones, okay? Does that make sense? I just want to put you back in the headspace. Now you're all sitting there thinking, well, this has been a great load of help. Yep, just come here and explain the problem to me. We will move on, but I just want us to spend some time getting in the headspace. Any questions on that? No? Crystal clear? Look at me go. Awesome. So now I want to move from talking about teenagers to talking about us, the grown-ups. And I want to talk about us as grown-ups having this thing, what I call emotional equality. Emotional equality. And by that I mean, as adults, and particularly as parents, being people who treat emotions of all types as valid, as real, and with equal levels of concern and energy. You see, there is a trend, and this is part of my job, is coaching parents one-on-one about how they're going with raising their teenager. And one of the biggest issues that comes up is there's this trend that's affecting parenting styles today, which sort of says, and I'm oversimplifying, and in talks like this, all we ever do is generalise on stereotypes, so again, not always right. But I think the stereotype and the generalisation is we live in a culture which thinks that happiness should be some type of emotional norm. Happiness is the norm. If you are happy, then that's the desired normal state of life. However, if we have uncomfortable emotions, well, they are to be avoided. And you look at the trend, and if you stand back and think about it, you actually see that lots of uncomfortable emotions, we're actually pathologising them. We're actually making them into medical conditions. If you have too much uncomfortable emotion in your life, that's actually something that needs treating. The flip side of that is actually saying, therefore, what should be normative? What should the normal be? We should always be happy. Now, no one ever comes out and says it, but once you're aware of that type of binary situation, it's quite evident. We are curing kids of all types of negative emotional, uncomfortable emotional experiences, and we are getting people to say the goal in life is to be happy. And we've probably all said it, I just want my kid to be happy. We don't really mean it literally like happiness has the emotion, we just want them to be content and whole and healthy. But we actually use the word happy. We move from sadness to depression really quickly. We move from fear to anxiety really quickly. And I want to suggest that part of it is parents are conditioning kids to respond emotionally in those ways. One of the things I find myself saying to people all the time, emotions just are. They're not right or wrong. There is no right or wrong feeling. Feelings just happen. You have very little capacity to control what emotion you are feeling at any time. As an adult, hopefully you have some capacity to manage those feelings and to control how you express those feelings, but it is very hard to control exactly how you will feel in response to a certain situation. Because if we could all do that, imagine what could be achieved. If you could literally control your emotions. We can't control our emotions. Emotions are just our being's way, our physiological way of responding to a context that we perceive happening around us. And sometimes the context, we can't even articulate it. Our body is picking up on something that we're not even consciously aware of, right? Feelings just are. Happiness and joy are just as likely to happen as sadness and anger and hopelessness. I have no more control over either one of them. Yet my experience is, of myself, and I'm working with lots of people want to downplay, dismiss, bury, avoid the uncomfortable emotions in life, particularly in their kids' lives, whilst upplaying the positive ones. And it's a very subtle trap. And my hunch is, some people in this room, your parents did it to you as well. We do it when kids come home upset and we say things like, I'm sure it's not that bad. Don't cry, sweetheart. Don't cry. It's okay. But it's not okay. Why do we feel like it needs to be saying it's okay? Wouldn't it be healthy to actually understand why they are crying? Isn't that a healthier response to understand what is behind the tears as opposed to stop the tears? Emotions are our body's way of saying something is happening. When we dismiss the uncomfortable emotions, we are effectively saying, I'm not interested in what's happening to my child. And that's a harsh way to put it, but that's effectively what we're saying. We need as parents and as individuals for ourselves, to be fair, to be just as comfortable to say, oh, this is happy. Why does this feel so good? Oh, because it's warm and it's sunny. If you ever leave Victoria, you'll discover this feeling. It's warm and it's sunny and it's great and I'm relaxed and I'm with the people I love, and we can reflect on that. We should do that with equal vigour and enthusiasm as we should say, oh, I just feel hopeless, I feel worthless, I just can't stop crying. Both things. Your body doesn't put a value judgment on one or the other. It's just a response to what they are encountering. As parents, it's important that in our homes we set up a place where negative feelings are just as accepted as the positive ones. And it's in all the subtle little things. And if you're sitting there thinking you don't do that, that you have complete emotional equality, I challenge you to go home and audit yourself for a week. And look at the way you respond to your own uncomfortable feelings versus your own positive feelings, and then all the subtle messages we send. We don't want our kids to be upset for too long because we feel uncomfortable with it. We just want them to be happy, because when they're happy, I can be happy. I completely get that. I have a 6-year-old who is high maintenance. I completely get, I need him to be happy because life's easier in the house. But if I avoid the negative stuff, I never discover what's going on, and it just perpetuates. And one of the big things that happens for teenagers is, because they are so wired to be so emotional, is that if we don't explore it, it doesn't get better. It gets worse. There's nothing more scary than an angry teenage boy who never gets angry, because he's been taught that anger is not acceptable in this house. It's not okay to be angry. That is different to saying certain expressions of anger are not okay, but anger is perfectly acceptable. But when we push it all away, we give kids nothing to do with it, so they push it down. There's a great South African academic, you might have heard of, Dr. Susan David. She talks about showing up to our emotions. And my challenge to you tonight is something you can completely control. It's not about your kid, it's about you. Showing up, instead of ignoring difficult thoughts and emotions or overemphasising positive thinking, facing into your thoughts, emotions and behaviours willingly with curiosity and kindness. That's what I try to do for myself. I absolutely try to do it for my wife, and she'll testify how poorly I do it. And I definitely want to do it for my kids. I want to face up, show up to all emotions with curiosity and kindness. And is that scary sometimes? Yep. Is it far less comfortable than hoping they hide in their room so I can drink red wine and watch Netflix? Yep. But what's more beneficial in the end for me and for them? Show up to the emotions. And as you do it, you're actually modelling to your kids. It's okay to have these emotions. When we model it's not okay to have some emotions, again, they've got nothing to do with them except push them down. And here's the thing about doing that. Emotions, sort of like springs. Emotions never go away. Our bodies, our psyches, we are wired. Emotions will always express themselves. I'll say that again. Emotions will always express themselves. We can either choose to let them be expressed in a helpful way. But if we don't choose to do that, then they will express themselves in an unhelpful way. And my little rant, which I'm happy to give you afterwards for another half hour, of the increase of mental problems in young people today has so much to do with unacknowledged emotions, the lack of freedom to healthily express what is really happening for them. It will manifest itself and it will come out in lots of unhealthy ways. It's not the only reason, but it's a big reason. And like I said, you do not want a teenage boy who feels angry all the time never being able to express his anger. That just doesn't end well. And it may not end well this year, or it may not be 2 years. Wait till he has kids. See how it ends then. Intergenerational family dysfunction is a whole heap of, the spring just gets compressed and compressed and compressed and compressed. Eventually that will come out. And if it doesn't come out as some sort of cathartic cleansing, it will come out as an addiction, as an abusive behaviour, as taking it out on other people, that we will project our negative emotions onto others and treat them accordingly. We overeat because we don't express our emotions well. We have bad communication with our spouses because we don't process our emotions helpfully. Teenagers who are wired with all that stuff we talked about, got all this emotional stuff going on, and then their parents don't let them or give them validity to express it. How does that end, do you think? Okay, so I can do a big rant on that, but that's just it, right? Emotions will always express themselves. Emotional equality is about saying, in this house, all emotions are okay. How you express them, yep, we have some boundaries and rules around what's okay when we express emotions, but I'm going to be leaning into you just as much when the emotion's uncomfortable as I am when you're having a great time and a delight to be with. And that takes effort on your part, right? But I want to encourage you to do it. So, that's emotional equality. That's a bit you can do, that's about you. Okay, now the sort of simple stuff, right? Creating healthy homes. Right, we want to teach our kids emotional resilience. So part of that is we've got to embrace emotional equality ourselves. But what do you do to teach your kids emotional resilience? We say feelings are helpful. This is important for teenagers because when big feelings, and again, I can only speak as a boy, I have very distinct memories of being overwhelmed purely because the feelings just felt too big. Dreading, thinking, if this is what being a grown-up is, I do not like it. I want to go back to playing trucks in the sand because life just got big on me and it was terrifying. That's probably not true for lots of people, and I get boys and girls, particularly in this space, have different reactions, again, because of the way the brains are wired and the social training we've had. But tell your kids feelings are helpful. Tell them both sets of all types of feelings are helpful. Feeling lousy, feeling angry, feeling worthless is just as helpful as feeling excited and happy. Teach them that it's a helpful thing, it's not a terrible thing. And again, if we overreact in negative ways to uncomfortable emotions, we actually send the message that feelings aren't helpful. If your teenager thinks that being upset in the house is an inconvenience to everyone, the logical next step is this feeling is an unhelpful feeling. Okay? And if you have a very expressive, energetic teenager, like the real extroverted one, their feelings can be exhausting on everyone, right? So we do have to work at trying to create a space which is helpful for everyone, and there's ways that you express it, but we never want to send the message that feelings are unhelpful because that just makes them scarier, and again, they'll push them down, not let them out. So we want them to be let out in a controlled way, but for it to be controlled, we have to have permission to let it out. Does that make sense? Yep, some puzzled looks. Label feelings. Again, it's not sexy, it's not complicated, but it's really important. Teenagers particularly, and in honesty, lots of Aussies, struggle to label feelings. I was sharing with some guys over dinner that one of the most common things I see, and it's not just males, but I am a male and I do a lot of work with males, is Aussie men have one negative emotion. Want to guess what it is? Anger, that's right. They're never sad, they're never disappointed, they're never hopeless, they're never helpless, they're just angry. They're either happy or they're angry. Sort of, you know. And it sounds unfair when I say it, but I've just met too many guys who are like it. And part of the reason is they were never taught to label an uncomfortable feeling as anything else. They probably never saw their dad label his feelings as anything other than anger. And that's not an excuse, it's just the way it is, right? But it's really important. These big, overwhelming things that are happening, if you give something a name, suddenly it approaches something that's controllable. If it is nameless and possibly formless, it's very hard to conceive how I can manage and control that. Particularly true for a teenager. So we help our teenagers label their feelings. And that's hard for them. They may not have the words. Part of that is leading questioning. Are you feeling like this? Do you feel like this? That sounds to me like you are feeling worthless. You're feeling helpless. We're trying to give them language because as they get language, that actually helps them express it. If I can't use language, well, how else do I express it except for hitting things or screaming? Oh, you give me words, then I can start to articulate and express the feelings to you in words. So I can articulate how much you are destroying my life and how that's making me feel, as opposed to just screaming and hitting you, right? Words are good. Choices. And this, we start getting the bit that you guys are really keen on, how to actually help our teenagers express their feelings. I'm all for this expression of feeling, just so long as it doesn't damage the TV, right? So we want to express TV, but we give our kids choices. And it's about saying, yes, the feelings are big and the feelings are real and they're not right or wrong, they just happen. You can't control your feelings. You can't control that they happen to you, but you have a choice. You have a choice about how you express them. But if they can't name it, they can't make the choice. So we've got to say, feelings are real, give it a name. When you feel like this, what are some things you could do? What do you feel like doing? Okay, yep, you probably shouldn't do that to your sister. That's not an option. Oh, that's a good option. Yeah, you could go for a run. That's a great option. No, you shouldn't do that to the car. Oh, yes, okay. So just writing it all down. Yeah, that would be great. Do you see what I mean? Give them choices of expression. They're not born with an innate sense of knowing what to do with big feelings. When they were 2, they just expressed it, right? You trained them really well up until 10 to stop inconveniently expressing themselves because, you taught them what acceptable behaviour was. But now these feelings are so big, those constraints of childhood acceptable behaviour are no longer suitable containers, so I need another choice. You are the person that can give them that choice if they can't find it for themselves. Yes?
It makes me reflect. I'm a speech pathologist, so I have a tendency when I get a strategy, I'll make some sign up and
Right.
take it home with the children. And so I made up an emotional toolbox, and I sat the kids down and I said, okay, when you're frustrated, what are some of the tools you can use? And that was fantastic, and it was beautiful pictures, and it was tailored, and it was personalised. And then one of the kids, usually my middle child, went right off. So I bring out the toolbox. And
That's right.
And I'm like, no, but it's choice. Make your choice. Are you going to play with marbles, or are you going to do jigsaw? These are your choices. And he was not interested in my toolbox at all. So
No.
I do give them choices, but my delightful and beautiful middle child drives me to distraction, because the choice he will frequently make is to drive anyone in the house crazy, because he's like not a generic battery but an energizer bunny that wakes up.
It's exhausting, isn't it? Yeah.
It's exhausting to everyone but apparently him.
That's right. That's because how he's wired. So have you ever gone back to him after the event and talked about what happened?
Always.
Yep.
Yeah. And he's actually very emotionally intelligent.
Yeah.
Probably more intelligent than the other 2 emotionally.
Yeah.
And it's one of his gifts. But my greatest challenge with him is in the moment to try and help him not to express his feelings in a really non-constructive way with his siblings particularly.
So he would be less than 10 though, isn't he?
No, he is 12, turning 13.
12, turning 13, yep.
He's my middle child. And he's always been like that since
Yep.
the moment he was born.
All right. So have you done the stuff about the triggers and then the choice after the trigger?
Yeah, and we'll reflect on the behaviour, and he'll just say, look, I knew where the boundary was, but look, he sat me down when he was 9 years old, and he says, I need to sit you down. You're not giving us enough consequences. I think we need to give more punishment. I would listen to him, and then he said, look, we could try rewards. No, that's not going to work at all. There needs to be punishment, and I've been stealing biscuits, and that's because you're not punishing enough. It's enough. So it's an interesting fellow.
He is. I'm going to come back to that a bit later. Is that all right? But that's really helpful. So does it always work? No, it doesn't. Does it work over time? my sense is eventually it does work. If you don't have the tool chart, you've got no reference point to go to. So part of what we're teaching, particularly young teenagers, is that it's not okay. Because there is a sense of which in some houses, they don't get that it's not okay. And particularly if mum and dad are allowed to go off their brain willy-nilly, it sets a standard. But does it work the first time? No. Does it work the 10th time? Sometimes not. What you're trying to do is create a culture of, no, there are boundaries and limits. And with any boundary setting with a teenager, the first 3 or 4 times, they're wired to not do it. That is not the same thing. I completely understand that that is not about boundary pushing. That's just about, being able to control self and being able to be...
We call it boundary riding. He's a boundary rider.
Yeah.
Like boundary.
That's right. And they're the challenging ones. But the process is still, it's even more important in that place, to keep defining the boundary. Yes?
The other thing that just made me think of was, I really liked your example, but it kind of related in a reasonably calm conversation, which you like to use, but in reality, they're often losing their minds, and a conversation, like actually talking out choices, is hard to do.
Yeah.
Where that was like a visual way, like the actual talking of
Yeah.
it, like even trying to have a conversation about
Yeah, with a 13-year-old boy. Yeah.
Like, is there another way, I suppose, of offering the choice?
Well, I was going to say, a really great thing...
Sorry, can you repeat the question for...
repeat the question. Probably not, but let's give it a go. Sometimes it can be really hard with a teenager to have the conversation about how to have the choice. And you're exactly right, and particularly for young boys again, because their brain doesn't let them have good conversations with anyone. That's, if you can communicate in grunt, you can probably get away with it, but if you can't do grunt, it's going to be really hard. So one of the common things I always tell people, but even with girls, because that brain rewiring makes them really vague. Boys, they're clumsy, they're vague, they're forgetful. It's not a character flaw, it's just a developmental stage. So lots of visual clues are really important. Anything from chores through to house rules, through to boundaries, through to behaviours. The more visual you can make it between 10 to 14, the more helpful it is. Okay, and have the same visual reminder in multiple places because it's really important. The other thing is with boys, and I'm not doing it, lots of people say this, but you do it shoulder to shoulder, right? Conversation happens when it's calm and we're doing something other than having a conversation. That's where the effective conversations happen. Be it driving in the car, going to sport, going for a walk, doing the gardening, you helping them do their chores because of course they're all in there doing that. Whatever it is, you do it shoulder to shoulder. Whereas mums more naturally want to try and communicate to boys the way girls like to communicate, which is, let's have a cup of tea in a quiet moment and sit down face to face and talk. I actually think that is a good way to do it with girls. If you can take them shopping first, I think they're far more amenable to it. But you know that. But with boys, the sitting down, let's have a coffee or a milkshake together, face to face. Some boys will do it. Emotionally intelligent boys might do it, but lots of boys won't. So doing it side by side. And then it's really simple conversations. Okay, so it's really simple. And there's a whole other thing I do about communicating teenagers, but really simply, if it is a repeated behaviour that is happening a lot and is having significant consequences, you actually make a time with your teenager, you practice what that conversation is going to be, and you have desired outcome, and you actually negotiate with your teenager about how that behaviour could be improved and agree on a process to improving it. But that's a planned conversation that happens at a separate time that's pre-arranged, that you've practiced, and you know your teenager best, you'll know how they'll respond to that. And you've got to practice, and there's a whole thing about that, but it's keeping them engaged in the conversation to get an agreed outcome. That's ultimately what you're going to do for repeated stuff that's really... In your head, absolutely. And if you've got a partner around who can help you, script it together. Yeah. Anyway, but thank you. That's really helpful conversation. I don't want to present that if you do all this, it works first time. Absolutely not. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a job. So glad it doesn't. No. Temporary, really important for teenagers. Tell them their feelings are temporary. That's not the same as saying, it's okay, it'll all get better. That's not what it is. It's just saying, empathise. That sounds really hard. That's really big. Yep, and I understand that's really hard, and I'm sad for you, and you're going to be sad for a while, but I want you to know that one day this sadness will pass. Don't even have to put a time limit on it. Just let them know that that big feeling isn't the new normal. But you've got to do it in a way that doesn't try to push it around, says, it's too uncomfortable for me, please stop feeling it. That's not what you're saying. You were saying, yeah, that's hard. I can promise you it won't always be like that, but I get at the moment it's hard. But just that little message of it won't always be like that, takes a little bit of the overwhelm away. And it actually gives you a bit more permission to say, oh, if this is just short term, I can sort of sit with it. But if it's indefinite, I want to run from it straight away, right? Does that make sense? Yep. So it's just a real simple message, but it's a powerful and effective message. And finally, what matters? So this is the part of the family culture stuff, which we don't have a lot of time to do tonight, but I can talk to you about afterwards. What are the values that are in our house? And part of the choices we're going to make about how we behave and how we're not going to behave based on our feelings are based on the values that we think are important, about how we value ourselves and how we value others. And for teenagers, the value conversation I think that is hard to have but most effective to have is how you value yourself. And again, for a 13-year-old boy, you don't want to start with the conversation, Jimmy, we need to talk about how you value yourself. Get a drink and come and sit here with me. You know, that's not going to work. But you know your kid best, but try and have that agenda conversation. What does it mean for him or her to value themselves? You know, I was reading the other day, there was this guy who does this discipline stuff in really difficult schools in the States. And he had this quote, which was, I'm going to wreck, you may have seen it, I don't know, but he said, every kid after a serious incident in my career, I've asked every kid after they've done something, you know, that's been bad, did it feel good to be out of control? And 100% of the time, they've all said no. Didn't feel good. Does it feel good when you do that? Does it really feel good when you see your sister or your mum or the impact you have? Does that feel good? That type of self-reflection would be good again for adults to do. And it is harder given they're younger teenagers, but definitely middle to late teenagers can have that conversation. They're quite capable of having that conversation. What is it they value about themselves? And what does it mean for them to value other people in the family? Now, I'm not going to stipulate what that is for you, but that gives these conversations some context and some import about forming your teenager, because that's what you want to do as a parent, right? You want to be involved in forming and shaping the superstar adult they're going to become. So all of that, that's just a little bit. There's a whole lot more, but I reckon they're the key bits. If you can be doing some of that, you're giving your kid a sense of emotional resilience, the ability to roll and move with the punches, keep picking themselves back up after emotional dust-up. Validate their feelings. I've already touched a bit on this in the emotional quality stuff. It's so powerful if you can just, no matter what's going on for you, when your teenager's having one of those emotional moments, to just let them know you have heard them and you understand what they are feeling. Which isn't the same as saying, I know what it's like, or I know how you're feeling. It's saying, reflecting back to them, yeah, that really sucks. Yeah, I hear, that must have been hard. For dads, and again, stereotypes, my wife does this more than me actually, but for dads in general, don't jump in and fix it. Your little girl can't fix it until she's expressed it. Right? You can't fix it till she's expressed it, and that'll make your marriage better when you stop doing it to your wife as well. Just let them feel it. Just hear it. Just cry with them. You don't really have to cry with them, guys, but you know, hold them. Just let the emotion be validated. Let them know that you have heard, because that gives them permission to feel. It's in that context that you can help them have a label. It's in that context that you can give them some choices. Just validate it. I don't mean you have to agree with it. I don't mean you have to condone it. I don't mean you have to approve of it. And I don't even mean that you have to understand it or think it's a rational emotion. I don't mean any of those things. All I mean is, at that moment in time, as a parent, you say to your child, I can see that that is really hard for you, or that really hurts, or that must make you feel really useless. You may be sitting there thinking, you are missing the point, kid. That is not what's going on at all. But that's not the point right then, right? What matters then is you connecting and giving them permission to just feel it in the space. Later on, you might want to go back and correct their perspective and say, did you ever think about that situation this way? But if their feeling's never been validated, it's so hard to have that alternative perspective conversation because the feeling's still there. I can never see it. You know, that's why we get feelings out. When we get them out, we give ourselves permission to see things differently.
So there's a resource you might enjoy on YouTube. It's called It's Not About the Male. And it's about a male-female relationship, and she's trying to express her discomfort, let's say, and he's trying to fix it. And it lasts about a minute and a half.
Oh, yeah.
It's just a fantastic
Thank you.
kind of thing about fixing versus hearing.
Yes.
My husband loved it and wanted to send it to all his brothers because it was a fantastic female-male representation.
It is. But like I said, my wife actually jumps to that quicker than me. Could be because of training. But thank you. What is it? Not about the nail. It's not about that. That's right. So, but it's so important for your teenager. Don't fix it. And their perspective often will be really screwy, right? Or the solution will be really obvious to you. Absolutely it will be. But you've got to understand them first. Let them know that you've heard them, and then they'll be willing to have a reframing conversation, maybe then, maybe later. Does that make sense? Got to validate their feelings. So I won't spend long, just model emotional responsibility. All the stuff we've just talked about, if you're not doing it yourself or you and your partner aren't doing it, then you can't expect a different result with your kids. I mean, common sense, right? Just thought I'd say it. Feels like I should. And then set the rules of engagement. So tell lots of parents I work with, I say to them, you need to have 3 things happening in your family. You need to be able to negotiate agreements with your teenagers. You need to have very clear boundaries with your teenagers, and you need to have house rules with your teenagers. The house rule stuff isn't just for your teenager. House rules should be things that everybody in the house abides by. So just be very careful when you make house rules about technology, folks. I would never make a house rule about technology, particularly from a guy who works on call and has to sleep with my phone next to my bed. You start making rules that have exceptions, rules don't work. You might want to set boundaries around it, but don't make rules about it. You don't want lots of house rules. You want really simple house rules, but the really important stuff. Rules like we're not physically or verbally violent with each other. You know, we talk to each other this way or we don't talk to each other this way. I would never have more than 5 house rules. You know, one of our house rules is dad is always right. So I've only got 4 left. And violence and smoking drugs in the house, I think, take up 2 of them. So really simple rules, but they're really important. And they're rules that the family all agree on, and none of us are allowed to do it. No matter how we're feeling, it's never okay to be verbally or physically violent with someone else in the house. It's never okay to damage someone else's stuff. And as a parent, you know, and that stuff, you think it's yours, it's really mine, so it's not okay to damage that because I paid for it, you know. Really simple about what are the extremes, what are the limits that are just never okay to go past, and we have a discussion about when those rules are violated, what are we going to do. One of the most important things about having rules is it's a way of de-escalating the situation really quickly. As soon as the rule's violated, then the conversation and the situation changes and ends. It gives you the power to just to say, no, we don't do that in this house. That is one of our golden rules. We don't do it. I'm ending this conversation, and you walk away. Because then it's not about you choosing to opt out. There's a third point. There's a rule over here that says I can't engage in this. We'll talk about it later, but as long as that rule's broken, we're not talking about it now. Setting the rules, making them clear. And again, it's not the 10 commandments. There's like 4 or 5 rules, I reckon. That's all you need. Because all the other stuff's about boundaries and limits and have to change and be negotiated over time. Lots of it's about spontaneous agreements. The rules are the big things that you just definitely don't want. But that is sort of like the backstop. When it all gets too big for everyone, the rules protect us. Okay? And ultimately, that's what you want in a safe home. We've got to be physically and psychologically safe. And it sounds a bit over the top, but I really recommend it, particularly if you have highly excitable or slightly troubled teenagers. All right, how are we going for time? Sorry, was there any other questions or suggestions on that stuff? Yeah.
You said about 3 minutes ago, you tell all parents, negotiate agreements.
Negotiate agreements, have boundaries or limits, and set house rules. Yep. I'm happy to explain that later to you. It's just take up time. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Don't be sorry.
I've still just got a preteen, but something I noticed from me trying to put myself in, what was it like when I was a really angry preteen like her? Okay, I really liked reading or going for a walk or, you know. So I'd naturally try and suggest these things as we're problem solving. What do we do? The choices, these are things. Especially when she was in the moment, she hated being reminded of any of these because it just felt like it was another way of my mum's trying to control me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And what I worked out was if I said, okay, what are you going to do about this? I'm going to leave it to you. And I left the room. She would end up finding some creative something that I would naturally go, oh, that sounds like the most frustrating thing in the world. But she would naturally just towards these fine motor skill creative things that I hated. And I was like, okay, I need to do that more rather than, because I think as a parent, like with the toolbox stuff, we get really excited. We go, oh, we could do this choice and that choice and this choice. But sometimes, we forget that our children sometimes will choose different things that we wouldn't think of because it's not
That's right.
we would like.
Yeah, and the other thing too, which you touch on there, is also when a teenager is calm, this is the funny thing, when you get kids to set their own consequences, when they're calm, they always think differently to when they're irrational, which we all do, but they also think about what would be effective for someone else, as opposed to, but when they're in the moment, they're much more likely to come up to a spontaneous thing. So that's a really helpful observation, and it's a good observation for lots of part of parenting. About part of empowering our teenagers to make their own choices is make their own choices in the crisis moments as well. What you are doing that's significant though that you've thought about, which you both have thought about, is when it's happening, I need a phrase or a thing to say that triggers for them, this is a moment where I need to make the choice. You're actually still triggering a reaction which isn't an uncontrolled emotion. You're saying, you know, if it breaks the rules or whatever it is saying, this isn't okay, you need to choose what you want to do about this. And I think that's the essence of what you're doing, but absolutely empower them to make their own choices. And I get the tedious thing. My daughter goes and colours in those really intricate things when she gets anxious. I'm like, oh, that would make me more anxious. But yes, we shouldn't presume to know, should we? Thank you. Oh, why'd I go all the way back there? Oh yes, parenting traps to avoid. All right, this is again for the person next to you, you're all okay with this. But some common stuff. This list can go on forever and we've all got our own. First one, don't take the bait. If I had 10 commandments of parenting teenagers, would be right up the top, would be don't argue with a teenager. There is no point in it. The only thing that can only type of result that can come from arguing with a teenager is a negative one. It'll be bad for you, it'll be bad for them, likely it'll be bad for both of you. Just don't argue. And before you say, well, how do you do that with the teenager? Guess what? It takes two people to have an argument. Choose to opt out. You've killed the argument. And I promise you, I know it sounds hard, but there is nothing, and I can go on again for ages about this, physiologically, why teenagers can't argue. It's not good for them. Emotionally, why you can't argue with them. It's not good for you. The power dynamics you create when you set an argument with your teenager, as soon as the argument starts, your teenager has already won. Even if you think you get it, it's a Pyrrhic victory. The teenager has achieved something.
Could you give us some words on how to opt out of an argument?
I don't have words, just force them into a room and lock it. I'm joking. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. Well, if they're in there already, you can lock it, but don't force them in there. Yeah, walk away. So, and if it's going to be an argument, it means you're normally emotionally escalating yourself. So you can be quite honest, say, I'm getting too upset to have this conversation now. I really want to have the conversation, but it's not going to end well for either of us. I need to walk away and calm down. So it's not about them, it's about you. If you're not feeling out of control, just pretend you are, because again, it's about making it about you, not you trying to control them, which can escalate the situation. I'll do a little thing in a minute. We'll talk about some de-escalating things, but it really is just opt out and just say it's for me. I'm getting too upset to talk about this. I promise I will come back to it. And when you say that, you literally have to do that, because the first time you don't do that, the next time you try to get out of an argument, that won't work as well. There'll be a second argument. But it really just remove yourself from the situation. And if you've got a culture in your house of where big arguments have been happening, they will follow you. And I've worked with clients where the kid will follow and want to have the argument. You can lock yourself in a room and let them bang on the door and scream and shout and threaten all types of stuff. If it's really serious and you think they're going to hurt themselves, just ring the police. That's in serious cases. Like, what's the choice? Their behaviour is trying to achieve something. As soon as you give in to that, you enable the behaviour. So when it's serious arguments, you've got to stop enabling it. You've got to start taking some power and empowering someone to make a helpful decision. But in most cases, purely saying I need to remove myself from the conversation and promising to come back to it later and coming back to it later is just the simplest way to do it. But there's just that whole fight and flight thing in a teenager, as soon as the emotions get escalated, you will not have a sensible outcome from that conversation, okay? So don't take the bait, and they will want to do that. So the power dynamic that's going on when teenagers are trying to provoke an argument, for that reason alone, don't have it. It just mucks up the whole dynamic you're trying to achieve with your kids. So don't escalate, which is similar to that type of thing. So we don't want to use closed statements. We don't want to issue demands. We don't want to issue threats. When it is heated, that is not the time to start issuing consequences or saying, you know what happens if. You actually want to de-escalate the conversation. Consequences can be implemented at any stage or any point. They don't have to happen in the moment. And most of the time for parents, when they try to issue it in the moment, it is them trying to regain control of the situation. that doesn't regain the control of the situation. It usually escalates the situation. Your teenager may storm off and therefore the argument ends, but it actually isn't constructive. Then you've just created more relational damage and therefore you've lowered your influence. Every time I damage a relationship, I reduce my influence. And influence is all you have over a teenager because they no longer think you're the smartest and you're no longer bigger than them. You've got to maintain the relationship to keep the influence. So don't escalate. Open-ended comments, focus on the future, not the past. Now it's not the time to start saying the list of things and all the times they've done it. That just escalates it, that heightens it, that increases the fight sense. Open comments, talk about the future, not the past. Watch your body language. Don't put them in a corner. Dads, don't try and tower over them. Any dads who are big enough to do that. And give your teenager a way out. Give your teenager a way out. And there's no real way to prescribe it because it's so situational, but just be conscious of, does my teenager need a way out of this conversation? Both physically, don't block the entrance to the door, don't try and restrict it, but also saying, give them the choice of, I can see this is really important to you, but I don't think you're winning your case at the moment. Do you want to come back later and have another go? Just give them a way out, okay? And breathe, just breathe. So you want to de-escalate it, don't escalate it. Anything you want to say about consequences, punishments, historical performance, future ambitions, just keep it to yourself. All you're worried about is calming that situation. Then when all our heart rates are normal, then we can start having whatever conversation you want. But if the argument's happening, you're not going to solve it and you're not really going to take control of it, okay? Don't be blackmailed. Again, I was telling someone at dinner, the one thing your teenager is an expert on is you. They've spent their whole life watching your every breath. Not every breath, because that would be creepy. But, they've spent their whole life watching you, how you respond, how you react, what your mood's like, how to tell what your mood's like, what your response is going to be. So by the time they're 15, they've got 15 years experience of watching you so closely. They are the best person in the world to emotionally blackmail you. They know you're the type of mum who's really sensitive to criticism. So when they want to hurt you and when they want to push your button, they'll tell you you're the worst mum in the world. That type of language, because they know you, that's your button. If dad doesn't care about that type of stuff, they're never going to say it to dad, but they know what pushes your button. If they know you're the type of parent that really thrives on the affection and the love and the cuddles and the time together, they will isolate you. They will shun you until you give them what they want. The behaviour is designed to get a result. Whatever it is for you, if you're the type of parent that really doesn't like the explosive, angry stuff, guess what your teenager's going to do when they want something? They're going to put on the explosive, angry performance. And I know it's really hard, but every time you give into it, you enable the behaviour. And that's just as true with working with little kids, right? It's the same thing. But teenagers just get way smarter at it. Little kids have just only a couple of options. Teenagers work out lots of options and emotionally manipulative options. And they don't even consciously, they just have subconsciously learnt how to manage you. They're probably better at managing you sometimes than you are at them. You need to discern what are my buttons, what are the ones they push, and then work out a strategy to say next time they do that, you've got to acknowledge that it's happening, but acknowledge it in such a way that says, I know what you're up to and I'm not buying it. It's not changing. Okay? And again, that's situation dependent, but it's good to think through for yourself. Don't take it personally. And by now you should be experts at this, but there's something that happens, I think, in adolescence because they're a little bit more grown up, where parents tend to start to reinvest their parenting pride, their parenting capacity on the performance or the behaviour of their teenagers. Yeah, try and stop that. It's not fair to you. Like if you have been a bit of a dimwit as a parent, well, just own it. But every emotional outburst from your teenager or the volatility level of your teenager isn't necessarily a reflection of your capacity or the love capacity as a parent or the love you have for your child. And we do that in lots of things, but try to divest your child's emotional status from your parenting competence or your personal worth. And that's hard, but just be conscious of it at least. I'll just flag it for you to say, have a think. And don't give up. If you work out a strategy and it doesn't work the first time, Because if it worked the first time, then you probably don't really need the strategy if it was that simple. If it's got so big and so difficult and so tiring that you've actually had to come up with a strategy, they've taken 15 years to develop that type of behaviour. If you think after 2 minutes of putting together your cunning plan that you're going to achieve something, it's slightly unrealistic. You know, it's like husbands just saying, I'm sorry, it's just, that strategy doesn't really work straight away the first time. What does work is thinking it through and then just being consistent, consistently applying it. As you consistently apply it, and different kids respond different ways, being consistent, you want behaviour change. Behaviour change happens over time. Behaviours develop over time, they take time to reorientate. Behaviour management is about consistency over time. And sometimes you just need to announce to your kids, there's going to be a change. And from now on, me and Dad or me and Mum are going to be like this. Announce it up front and then be consistent with it. And expect that the first half a dozen times you put it into place, it's going to go pear-shaped. It's actually not going to get better. It's going to feel worse. That's okay. Well, unless it's a crap strategy, then it's a disaster. But let's just assume it's a good strategy. No. Any strategy is better than no strategy. Just say things are going to be different. Because as soon as you start changing the outcome that the behaviour achieves, over time you'll start changing the behaviour. Okay? Now, if there are extreme cases where it just gets worse and worse and worse over a significant period of time, then you might want to talk to a professional about it. But in most cases, don't give up. Okay? And when I say don't give up, I don't even mean just the big strategy stuff. I mean saying goodnight to your kid every night, telling them that you love them, asking, is everything okay? 99 times out of 100, a teenager will say, when you say, is everything okay? You keep asking for that one time in 100 where it's not okay, and they need you to know it's not okay. You don't stop leaning in. You don't stop asking if it's okay. It is the most unrewarding experience you'll have for a while. You'll think it doesn't matter. It does matter. It matters immensely to them that you care enough every day to say, are you okay? I love you. All right? Just keep doing it. I know most of you are. Sometimes you just need to hear it's worth it. Even though there is no visible sign that it has any effect at all, it has an effect. Is that cool? All right. So, did people come tonight with an issue with their teenager or their pre-teen that they would have liked to have explored a bit, that I haven't really covered in any of this stuff, that you'd want to raise? Yes?
How do you deal with the age gap between your 16 years old and then 6 years old?
I make it a financial transaction and I pay her to like them. It works. No.
Why I ask is I have 7-year-old gap between my teenager and my younger one.
Yeah.
So I want to know, what do you do?
Look, it is really, it's not easy, but it's not the hardest problem in the world. I think first, in no particular order, always make sure that both sets of the kids have time to do the stuff that matters to them. So the 16-year-old, part of what we do is we very intentionally protect her space. She's assertive enough by herself, but part of us is keeping the 6 and 4-year-old out of her space. We sort of have to, that's our parenting role, to protect her space as much as her protecting her space, because what's important for an adolescent is that sense of space and, because the 4-year-old is still walking on mum on the toilet. That's not okay to do that to your big sister. It's not okay to interrupt her in the middle of the shower, because 4-year-olds do think whenever the shower's on, that is the time to ask a question. You can't do that to your 6. So it's physically protecting the space and us taking that responsibility. It shouldn't be up to her to always have to tell her brothers to get out of her room. That's creating unnecessary tension. The other thing that's just hard is we try to give her time to do stuff she enjoys whilst also trying to give stuff to the boys that they enjoy. So we just acknowledge that sometimes we operate like 2 little mini families within one family. That's fine. But the other thing we do, and there was a lovely moment, we've got this beautiful photo, we were away on a holiday last week, where there is stuff that we can all do together. So I know it's hard in Melbourne, but in New South Wales we have things called beaches, like sand right up to the ocean. It's nice. And, so we will do things like, as regularly as we can, we do an activity that the whole family can do. And there's not heaps of them, right? Like movie night she's actually sort of cool though. She'll sit down and watch the cartoons with the kids. But going to the beach is something really the whole family can do together. And whilst they don't always have to be together, it is a family thing to do together. Mealtimes, I'll admit, we're not great at every night family meal times, but we do try to create at least once a week the whole family just has the meal together, and they've got to listen to her. And it is lovely sometimes, and I'm sure you've had this experience, there are moments where the 4 or 6-year-old will ask the 16-year-old just the best question in the world, and you go, Yeah, I want to know that. Yeah, Holly. Yeah, what he said, you know. So it's not about trying to create, you know, this big happy family all the time. And I do pay her to we'll go out, we'll pay her to babysit the boys, and they love it. They love it when Holly's looking after the boys. They think it's fantastic. Now, it depends on the temperament of the kids and all that type of stuff, but I think it's being very conscious of protecting the 16-year-old, giving her space. We're very conscious that her boundaries look very different to the boys, and we even overplay that a bit because it's important for them and it's important for her to understand the difference. Yeah, so I think that's the ones that come straight to the top of my mind. Does that sort of help? Probably not. Were there any other issues people came tonight thinking, oh, I'd like to know more about this?
I have a bit of a side one.
Yeah.
But just, you did mention that consequences in the moment can escalate.
Yeah.
And impact and cause relational damage, which causes your influential
Mm.
meters come down. So, what is the best way though to indicate to an up and down, almost 12-year-old who's really articulate, really highly emotional, always has the right answer for everything, that she's often coming across as really disrespectful, especially to her dad, and he'll say, right, go to your room.
Yep.
So it's almost like she's dismissed straight away. I get the thing about respect, but it's really hard. What's alternatives to that? Because she goes away fuming, but try and make it up in the next day or two, but she's not really heard. She's just trying and struggling to express something big going on about what's happening.
Yeah, yeah.
And we both err on just sending her away.
Yep.
It's like what you were saying, the things that work from 1 to 10, those containers don't work anymore. So
Hmm.
do you have any tips about that, just when a conversation's getting heated, when we're able to monitor ourselves and try not to add to that heat, but she's crossed a line?
Yeah. Oh, you've nearly answered your own question, right? It is to sort of say, yep, the old thing of time out or, you know, sit in the corner or whatever, that's not appropriate anymore. It's not going to work, and I think it does undermine your influence, and it just builds up this adolescent picture of the evil adults trying to ruin my life, which maybe you're doing. But the thing you could do is just as you said there, you've acknowledged there that it needs, the behaviour isn't okay, but to try and, I guess, create a consequence in the moment is also not okay. So what you need to work out a way to do is to say, to verbally acknowledge to her, that's not okay. You can choose to keep having this conversation, you know, with adults, or we can choose to have it later. And you can make even sassier comments than that, but one of the things with disrespect is you never let it go, but depending on the degree of it, it depends on your response to it. Okay? Now they'll do it. You'll also start doing it when her friends are around. That'll be, if she's that smart, she'll disrespect you in front of her friends. So what are you going to do when that happens? Because it's hard to send her to a room when they're having a slumber party, because that's sort of like, well, that's a reward, right? Yeah. So it's to work it out, and it's about you. But what is the thing you can say? What's the humour you can use? And if it's just you and the family, though, just you and your husband, it's something like, and this is what you say, but something in the vein of, did it feel good to say like that? Because it didn't make me feel good, and it's not making me want to help you at the moment. Do you want to have the conversation properly, or do you want to talk to me like that? You say, yeah, I'm firm, I'm clear, I'm acknowledging, I'm saying it's not okay, but I'm not going over the top with the consequence, and I'm not trying to fix the behaviour. Again, if it keeps happening, what you need to do then is, like I said before, you need to keep some data points, to make it sound all techie, and set a time. So it's a time when nothing's going on, it's all calm, and Sarah, whatever her name is, Sarah, Saturday morning, me and your dad just want to have a quick chat to you about a couple of things that are going on. And then at that chat, you start by affirming her, then you say, but we have noticed that this and this has been happening. It's not okay with us that that's happening. We don't think it's actually okay with you. Have you noticed it's happening? And then you try to have the conversation around together, what can we do to help you actually choose a different way of behaving?
That's really helpful. Thanks.
Is that right? Yeah.
Chris, sometimes I feel like it's parenting on the run. I mean, often, there's a situation.
Welcome to my world. Yeah.
So it arises, you haven't had any warning, and the things that you've put, obviously, they all sound really, common sense, as you say. But what happens if, as a couple, you're not aligned?
No,
Even if it might not even be that you are going to respond differently, but you've actually had no notice or preparation, and so then you're in a situation. In our family, there's one child, so you've got this three. It can be any two of the three. The dynamics can change a lot, but often just feeling unhealthy can because of the three and, the lack of alignment.
Oh, okay. Can you repeat that question really succinctly?
Sure. How do you handle situations of feeling like you're a parent on the run, where you're unprepared for a situation, and that possibly the parents aren't aligned in the most appropriate response?
Yes. So talking about when stuff just happens that you're not prepared for, and how parents may respond differently or not be aligned on how they deal with it.
Yeah, either be through lack of preparation or maybe...
You just never thought of it.
Opinion.
Yeah, or your different parenting styles, a different way to do it. Okay. Well, the real simple answer is you'll screw up your kid for life. They'll become a car thief. That's what happens. No. We had that old joke, inconsistent parenting produces car thieves. It used to be funny. I don't know why, yeah. So it's the exact opposite, right? If it happens the first time and you both respond differently, or the husband buggers it up, because that's what husbands do, and you're sitting there going, oh, well, that's just made it worse, the world will go on. They will not be spending money on therapy because in one instance you and your husband made a bad decision or had a difference of opinion about how to deal with it. So let's all take the pressure off, and you're exactly right. That's why I said at the start, talks like this make it all sound, yep, there's a solution for everything and we should all have it together. We're all going to mess it up, and we've all been products of parents who messed it up, and your kids have already products of parents who've messed it up. So another stuff up amongst the 1,000 you've already made, they're either stuffed or they're not. So you're okay. But if you haven't thought about it, the first time it happens, yep, you're going to parent on the run. My experience is most adolescent behaviours are repeatable and likely to repeat, particularly if the teenager gets what they want out of it. So in that instance, show grace and kindness to each other and say later, after they've gone to bed, if they ever go to bed, when you've gone to bed, did you really think that was the best thing for us to do in that situation? Like, are you really that stupid, hubby? To have that conversation and then try and align yourselves with it. So next time it happens, what can we do? So that's just what you've got to do, and that's absolutely okay. And just be kind to one another. And if you think that what you've done has set some type of precedent for your teenager, then you just need to go back and address it in a calmer time. Saying, look, this happened the other day. I know I said this and your dad said that. We've had a talk. In future, this is what will happen. Like, being very generous. Now, if the question is slightly different in terms of me and my partner have very different approaches to our parenting style, that's a longer conversation for you to have. And in one sense, all of us probably have different parenting styles at one level, but just to gradually find agreement on doing stuff. And again, just something that's been on my mind this last week or so, the dads need to be allowed to be in there to deal with the issues. Mums, don't keep the dads out of it. It's really important, particularly for the boys. It's really easy for mums to jump in and deal with most of the issues. Dads have to get in there and get dirty. It's important for the kids, okay? I'm not saying that's your issue, I'm just off the top of my head. It's really important. Sometimes dads don't want to step up. Lots of times dads don't feel like they can step up because mum's either so good at it or she never gives them the chance to. So you've got to have that open and honest conversation. But yeah, I think, yep, it is parenting on the run. Stuff happens, they've changed, they're not the same as they were 2 years ago, and whoa, wow, where'd that come from? Yeah. I think it's just then in your relationship, have you got the capacity then to have that calm conversation around, yeah, I know I said that, I shouldn't have said that. What do you reckon we should do? I don't know. Then go to Google and find an answer. Yeah. Is that sort of like, I'm not trying to be flippant about it, but take the pressure off yourself. This is not meant to say there is a perfect response in every situation. It's meant to say, here's some principles. Yes, you'll stuff it up, but try to keep working in this direction, and over time it gets better, I think. Thank you though, really helpful.
I was just going to say, you haven't touched on the social media aspect with teenagers, because sometimes that can have a huge influence on...
Yeah, okay. On their emotional state? Yeah, okay.
And influence on their emotional state and information input and,
Okay, yep.
There's a whole other world.
There is. Yep. And in one sense, social, yeah. Sorry, so I haven't touched on the issue of social media. So I'm just repeating the question. Hello everyone online. Sorry, I haven't acknowledged you really. The impact of social media, there is a whole other world out there. It does have a significant impact. Again, that is a whole another 2 talks worth of stuff. But in terms of relational stuff, we good?
Yeah, they can hear you, apparently.
Oh, right.
No, sorry.
No, they can hear other people when they ask questions.
Oh, good.
So
Well, thanks for that guidance again, Graham. You've really helped me. That's exactly right.
lucky you don't do what I tell you to do most of the time.
Have you finished? Can we get on with the talk? Yes, it is a big issue. How does it impact? In the emotional health, yes, I think it is making a difference to emotional health. Do I think the research is overstated and made bigger than it is? Absolutely. It's too young to make the claims people make about teenage emotional health and social media. But is it making a difference? Absolutely, it's making a difference. Do we know that any brain response, the plasticity of the brain to social and internet-based digital communications, the brain will adapt to it and a forming brain will change to it. Do I think it has something to do with increased levels of anxiety and depression in young people? Absolutely it does, but not purely because of the technology itself, but partly because what the technology is preventing. So I think if kids are actually stopped from actually just getting out into nature more often, it's not the technology creating the problem, it's the absence of nature, of urban environment is creating as much of a problem as anything else. So I think it's a big topic, but it's like anything, like I said before, you need to have really clear agreements with your kids and really clear limits with your kids. And even though your kids will think access to phones and the internet is a right, it's actually a privilege. And parents, we need to be really clear, what is your child perfectly entitled to? What is a right a child should expect to have from their parents? Everything else is a privilege. I'm telling you, the rights list is a really short list. And if you choose to feed them, then it's a little bit longer. But basically, the rights list is a really short list. The privilege list is a really big list. The problem we face is, if you start trying to define the privileges when they're 15, that they haven't been called privileges for the first 15 years, that's a hard conversation, and that will create a whole heap of angst. Does it mean you shouldn't have the conversation? Absolutely not. You should start having the conversation. But social media use in kids is purely a response of the boundaries and the limits that parents set. Yep. So it's about setting boundaries and limits around usage, which you are completely in control of in your house. It's also about participation with. So participate. Social media is not a teenage domain, which is to the exclusion of all adults. Just as you can participate in their sport, or their shopping, or their fishing, or their whatever it is they do, social media is just another domain of life where you as a parent gauge what level of engagement do I want to have with them in that space. Does that make sense?
I think Annie was feeling like, though, how do we as parents somehow kind of filter that information? Because, yeah, we have a certain culture in our house, for instance, and we feel like sometimes, yeah, it's very difficult to fight against all that outside influence.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it is. And part of it is, but again, I want to say that social media, like there's lots of studies out there say what kids are experiencing on social media is just an extension of what they're already experiencing in the playground. Kids who are bullied online are usually bullied in real life. Kids who bully online usually bully in real life. Does the frequency change? Absolutely. Does the reach change? Yes. But at the very core, the bullied are bullied everywhere. The bullies bully everywhere, for instance. So what's the principle? The principle is, well, if my kid's been bullied, I need to help them deal with bullying, whether it happens in the playground or on social media. If they've been a bully, I need to deal with it. And I'm just picking on bullying. So one of my concerns when we talk about social media is we make it a whole nother topic. And I get for us who didn't grow up with it, it feels like a whole nother topic, but it's actually not a whole nother topic. All the principles I've spoken about tonight apply to the social media use or to how they play in the backyard together. It's the same stuff. We just got to get past the intimidation of it. If it is so prevalent in your house that it feels like it's everywhere, I'm not trying to get out of the question, but it's a boundary issue. You know, if your teenager is out till midnight every night, that will change the effect of the house and your teenager too. Do you let your teenager stay out till midnight every night? My hunch is, well, maybe you do, but you probably don't, you know. So you say, well, we have curfews about when you're meant to be home, when you're meant to be in bed. We have curfews around the social media. Does it create unique social problems for teenagers in terms of that 24-hour, the FOMO, all that type of stuff? Yep, it does. But again, an emotional response to something online or an emotional response to something in the playground is the same emotional response. There's just another layer of frequency or reach that thing has, but the sense of how are they processing what's happening online? Is that sort of making sense? Or am I still missing the point? I feel like I'm missing the point.
I mean,
Yeah.
That's fine. But also in society now, there is a whole other lack of boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I'm finding a 16-year-old entering into sport and all sorts of things, and at school, and a world where sexual fluidity is acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a whole other
It is.
issue, and coming from the generation I come from, there's a huge gap between what they're facing
Yep.
and what I had experienced and faced. And now everything is acceptable. Anything anyone does is acceptable, and I don't get it.
That's right. Great observation. You don't get it. Your goal then as a parent is to understand what your teenager gets. It's not your job to get it. Your job is to understand what your teenager gets. Once you understand them, so get curious about it. That's the start. There's a lot more to it, but if you're asking where do you start with it, you're, in one sense what you're saying, it's not social media. It feels like their worldview is so different to yours that it's sort of hard to make the connection. One way to make the connection is to get curious about it. Understand what your teenager really thinks about it. So think about participation and engage with them. Look at Instagram with them. Talk to them about that fluidity, etc. What do they think about it? They actually might surprise you what they think about it. And the first way, the key point for them actually wanting to embrace you, because they're still going through that emotional autonomy where you can preach them to the cows come home, all you're going to do is entrench, well, that's one thing they may not consider. You want to try and avoid that. And it's risky and it feels scary because you feel like, oh, I've got to try and shape them. The way you will have influence over shaping them, particularly for a 16-year-old, is by actually spending the first 80% of any conversation asking questions that shows you are curious about what they think. Does that make sense? So you don't have to agree with it, you don't have to condone it, you don't have to like it. It may scare the bejesus out of you. That is, yep, I get that. Suck it up. You're a parent, this is what you're doing for your kid. You have that conversation and you just keep asking, oh, right. And so what do you want to do about that? Oh, is that attractive to you? Oh, right. Oh, okay. What do other people think about that when you say that to them? I haven't told anyone else, Mum. Oh, wow, no, she's only telling you. You'll be surprised how quickly that moment will arrive. Now, it may not happen in the first conversation, but get curious. Open the conversation. Your teenager, they're not going to open that conversation with you, okay? You've got to be curious about them. Reserve judgment. Keep it to yourself. Keep all your opinions to yourself. You want them to go somewhere? Forbid it. You want them to get attracted to something? Then say it's out of bounds. What you do want to do, though, is just be curious about it until the point whereby you think the behaviour is risky to them or to others. If the behaviour becomes risky, well, then you've got to do something different. But in your situation, you're right, you don't get it. That's a great admission. So now you want to understand, what does your teenager get? You want to get your teenager. You don't have to stand the complexity of a sexually, ubiquitous world where nothing's really defined. All your job is just to understand what he or she thinks about it and where they're going with it. And then you'll actually find it really easy to connect, I think. So I don't want to belittle the problem, but am I sort of...
No, that's good.
Yeah.
Question from somebody on the video.
Really, or are you just making stuff up? Yeah, okay, right. Yeah. Thank you for the water too, whoever brought this up.
Are there optimal times for teenagers to go to sleep and wake up, other than simply getting the 9.5 hours sleep?
Optimally, yeah, they'll want to go to, well, it varies with anything, but the research says that melatonin secretion by mid-adolescence is sort of gone out to after 10 p.m. and is sort of dying off, so it's anywhere between 10 and 11, but that means they naturally don't want to wake up until around 8-ish. So that's ideal, but lots of school times don't permit that, right? So you've got to try and bank some sleep. But if you got to pick it, you'd let your kid go to bed at 11, let them sleep till 8. That would be the ideal, but our world isn't set up for that.
I guess the big question I came in today is sibling conflict.
Sibling,
conflict.
oh yeah.
And it seems that my middle child thrives on it. And we have tried to be really intentional throughout their life in trying to manage this issue, from boundaries to consequences to family meetings to even the last one a month ago was like a rites of passage, an
Yeah.
initiation thing into becoming the teenage years. You know, we take the same-sex child away for a week before
Good on
they
you.
hit 13. So we try to be really intentional about these things, and we talk to the siblings and we say how to disempower that person when they're picking on you. So we've tried all these things, and somehow I feel maybe the answer that I say to myself is you're like a ship in a storm, and you've just got to keep going in the same direction, and one day hopefully he'll stop bouncing off the sides and actually go in a clear path. But I don't know what else to do. Like, I just sit there going, why do you constantly do this when the boundaries don't shift, the consequences are there, but you seem to get such satisfaction from setting your siblings off?
So have you actually had that conversation?
Yes.
Yes, and what was the answer?
What was the answer? I can't tell you right now in a coherent sentence.
That's right.
I don't know. I can't answer it right now. But yes, we've talked about that, and I don't know.
So one thing could be, it sounds like you've done way more things than I'd think of. Yes, part of it is just ride out the storm. But if it's been happening his whole life, there is a reward. I don't have to tell you this. There's a reward for him.
I'm trying to work out what is it in me that I'm doing to give him that reward. I'm trying to work out subtly what are we doing to feed.
Yeah. So the only risk I would say there, which is really common, is that just like don't restrict what you think the reward could be. It may actually not be what you're doing. There could be something completely different to you that is a reward for him. So try and approach the reward thing, as I know you're doing. Maybe widen your scope as far as you possibly can.
Well, I do. I even think that he's so competitive that it's a form of competition, that he can outdo his siblings, that he can out-talk his siblings, that he can out-annoy his siblings. So I think about it in those contexts too.
Yep. So if you explore all that, so sometimes, what is it, 13?
No,
12,
12.
yes.
Turn on 30.
So that's the trouble, he can't articulate it yet either, right? Even if you knew it.
No, he's pretty good.
Is he? So I wouldn't give up on the conversation in the calm, debriefing, well, what'd that feel like? And actually talk to him. The other thing to talk to him about is and one way to do it is to talk about the brain stuff. Have you done that thing where you actually explain to your son what's actually happening to his brain and to his body as he hits puberty? I don't know if you did that as part of the rite of passage.
With our daughter, definitely.
Yeah.
And we will transition into that conversation when he has his initiation.
Yeah. So I think if you can have that conversation with him, that may start that agenda thing rolling of him having an awareness of what's happening to him. And then that is another lever in that conversation of, so when you did that, what was that like for you? What did it feel like? I'm sure you've done the stuff around the siblings giving feedback what it's like for them. And he doesn't give a toss.
No.
Absolutely. And it could be what's feeding it. Have the siblings tried changing how they react to it? Yeah.
Well, I try to empower them, but it's so incessant that they'll snap eventually and go back to just reacting.
And the only other thing I can think is if you explore all that, and you'll know more about this than me, would be does he actually have a problem with his impulse control? And
Yes.
yeah, and then sometimes you just do need to get a specialist help with the impulse control stuff. So do some proper CBT with him. Sometimes is the best way to fix that. I don't actually have a relational way to fix that. And that's okay.
And CBT is the changing of thinking areas?
Yeah, cognitive behaviour therapy. So so we change the way behaviour and thinking impact on each other. So I don't know if you've tried that, but
Well, I've got some skills in that through
Yeah.
my workplace, so I've done a lot of that through
Yeah.
my childhood myself, but not from an external source.
yeah. So sometimes I think just getting some expert CBT help in on some of that stuff I think can help. Sorry, I can't give you. You sound like you've tried everything. Hang on tight. Drink red wine late at night. Yeah.
Question. I'm just wondering whether you've got any tips on getting buy-in for kids for this type of stuff, because some of the behaviour that we get at home from our 14-and-a-half-year-old middle child boy, interestingly enough, is that he just does the flat no. I'm sorry, you can't tell me what to do kind of stuff. And I kind of feel that a lot with the education system, they're encouraged to question everything, to really think through what they're doing in the classroom, and the teacher is not always right, that kind of thing. And I don't know whether it's that kind of behaviour that's coming home, but it's just really, really difficult to deal with the no and the fact that he, quote, according to his sisters, always gets away with it, because there's just doesn't seem to be any kind of way that you can escalate it, because you don't want to because of all the other issues. I don't know, just tips for that kind
Tips.
Are you meaning just to your son
Yeah,
just
to-
do stuff?
Yeah, just general stuff. Can you pick that up
Do
off the
anything,
floor?
do
No,
anything.
you can't tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Ah,
You know, that
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah.
really simple,
Yeah.
just because you're my parent, you don't have
Yeah.
the right to tell me to do anything.
Yeah. Right, so my first point is, at that age, just don't sweat the small stuff, right? So don't give him the chance to do that. So can your life go on if his bedroom floor looks the way it does? And for some parents, some parents the answer, yeah,
That's not one
yeah.
of the things that we worry about,
Yeah,
actually.
that's right. And so you just extend that across a wider thing of life, okay? Yeah, it's not okay, and yes, we don't. And so again, for you to remember, adolescence is temporary. Just like feelings are temporary, this is temporary. Doesn't condone it, doesn't say it's okay, but what's the stuff that really matters right now? Is picking a fight with my son and giving him the chance to play a power game with me every day the thing I really want to do with my son, or do I actually want to make a different choice? So I bet your mum, no one else cares about that plate except you and your partner. That's right. So the other kids actually won't notice a great injustice if you don't ask him to pick it up. It only becomes an issue when you ask him to pick it up and he defies you. So you've just created your own little mountain out of what was not even a molehill to anyone else. So you've got to try and to say, well, for this period of time, and have an agreement and set a time and review it after a period of time and say, right, here's the stuff that is, if the defiance is going out late and engage in risky behaviour, that's completely different to not being helpful around the kitchen. To those things. So if you don't have to do the incidental stuff and it's not going to create this great sense of injustice in the whole household, then don't have it. If it's around, I want you to do this, then that's the agreement stuff. So, what's his name?
His name is
Wes. Wes, can you put the bins out? Okay? No, you can't tell me what to do. Okay, Wes, I need you to take the bins out by 5 p.m. tonight. I'm not going to ask you again. Either you can choose to take the bins out by 5 p.m. tonight, or you won't have access to X, Y, and Z. Do you need a reminder at 4 p.m, Wes? Yes or no? Done or dusted. He either does it or he doesn't do it. You implement the consequence afterwards. Okay? It's not the spontaneous stuff. And will he defy you the first time? Guaranteed. Will he defy it the first 3 times? Absolutely he will. But eventually he won't. So that's an agreement. We make an agreement. And if it's ongoing stuff, not just the spontaneous stuff, then you say, Wes, part of being a family is we have responsibility for the house. Give him 1 or 2 things that he is responsible for. Because responsibility is actually really important to them. And if it's a responsibility that they own and they give to the family, that's completely different to them complying to something you want them to do. So you set up a structure where it's actually him achieving and him controlling and choosing time and place and execution rather than him complying to you.
Which would be great if we actually hadn't already gone around all the different chores and gave him first choice about the thing that he needed to do.
And he's not doing it?
Still not doing it.
That's fine. And so then there's just purely, and then sometimes be humorous about it. But you just got to persist with it, right? Because as long as it's consequence free for him, now it's just a struggle between you and him. And he's going to say, I've got you. You'll give up before I get tired of doing it. Sometimes it's just grit your teeth and go at it. Sorry, that is a longer answer, but that's a quick one.
I'd be happy to keep listening to questions and the responses. There's so much insight and that's valuable, but
Got to go home.
We are at time. Can we first just thank Chris for coming tonight?
Thank you.
Chris, where do we find Understanding Teenagers and what is available to us if we get there?
Understandingteenagers.com.au is the website. There is a blog there which has articles on most of the issues that we've raised tonight. Some of them probably need updating. And there's also the services there that I offer around coaching and speaking, etc. Yeah.
And so specifically the sort of services for parents, there's blogs, there's courses.
There's some free courses there. There's soon to be some more intensive video, proper whole courses, which are in development. And then there is private coaching for single parents or couples, however you want to do it. Virtual coaching.
Courses online?
Yeah, they will be eventually, yeah. So at the moment, they're just email courses. So there's a couple of ebooks, there's a few courses there. We get emails with some stuff to do. And any day now, there's going to be courses with like videos and presentations on it as well. Yeah, so there's that, or if it's a bit bigger than that, there's you can book me in for a free strategy session. We can work out what a helpful way is for you from there.
Fantastic. You've got some...
I gave them to you because you said you'd deal with that.
No, you left them on the table at the front.
You gave it back to me.
We're just going to hand these around just to get some feedback on the night, both for Chris and for us here at Ridley. If you could double up and use this if there are other sorts of topics that you would like us to address in this sort of forum, then you could write any other things for us at Ridley on the back. But other than that, I'm going to say thanks very much for being with us tonight. If you would like to stay in touch with the sorts of events that the Centre for Children's and Youth Ministry is offering, there are two avenues for that. One is to follow us on Facebook and you'll get the events will come through there. The other is to get onto the Ridley event mailing list, and you'll get the details of all the sorts of public events like this that are offered. So, yes.
Are these notes available online or particularly?
I'm happy to provide that pack for you if those notes jog your memory. And on the blog, most of those issues, there's a blog on them somewhere. Yeah. Probably not as eloquent as I spoke about it, but yeah, it's there.
So once again, thanks very much. Please hang around if you're able to. There's more, tea and coffee and things to eat up the back. And grab Chris if you want to ask him individual questions. Thanks very much for being here. Let me just say a quick word of prayer before we go. God our Father, we thank you for our brother. We thank you for all that he's been able to reflect on and what he's been able to share with us tonight. Lord, I pray for each family, each parent, each teenager here in the room and joining us online. I pray for your blessing for the experience of peace. I pray for that maturity in each one of us, that we might be able to love and serve the teenagers that you've given us in our lives in a way that will be best for them and a blessing for others. So we thank you for the time together tonight in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you very much.